Good morning, everybody. It's the end of another week. We are on Saturday of the 23rd week in Ordinary Time. And our text today is 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 14 to 22. Now, I realize that on Saturdays, our viewership tends to diminish a bit because a lot of people, I guess, sleep it out on a Saturday. But I want to tell you, today's topic is a very interesting topic, and here's what I'm going to do. As a Catholic, can I take part in a puja and eat the prasad offered? And that's the question which many of you have asked me earlier, and I said, when we come to Corinthians, I will do it. So 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 14 to 22. Of course, I'll be doing much more than that. So don't forget today, send this video out to your friends because so many of them need this question answered. Now, let's read the text first, 10, 14 to 22. Therefore, my dear friends, flee from the worship of idols. I speak as to sensible people. Judge for yourselves what I say. The cup of blessing that we bless, is it not a sharing in the blood of Christ? The bread that we break, is it not a sharing in the body of Christ? Because there is only one bread, we who are many are one body, for we all partake in the one bread. Consider the people of Israel. Are not those who eat the sacrifices partners in the altar? What do I imply then? That food sacrificed to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? No, I imply that what pagans sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. I do not want you to be partners with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and the table of demons. Or are we provoking the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than He is? The word of the Lord. You compare chapter 10 of St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, you might wrongly arrive at the conclusion that Paul is contradicting himself. Paul clearly states that he does not recognize the power of any idol. In his words, when he says, no idol in the world exists and there is no God but one. We saw this in chapter 8, verse 4. So what Paul is simply stating in chapter 8, verse 4 is that no idol has any power before the worship of the one true God. Hence, in this context, he says that eating food offered to idols, so-called gods, as he calls them in verse 5, makes no difference. Now, food will not bring us close to God. We are no worse off it. We do not. Okay, I made lots of mistakes. When you compare chapter 8, which we did yesterday, and chapter 10 of St. Paul's letter, which we are doing today, when you compare chapter 8 and 10 of St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, some of you might wrongly arrive at the conclusion that Paul is contradicting himself. What he says in 8 and what he says in chapter 10 are different. Now, Paul clearly states that he does not recognize the power of any idol. When he uses those words, he says, no idol in the world exists and there is no God but one. He said this in chapter 8, verse 4. Now, what Paul is simply stating is that no idol has any power before the worship of the one true God. Hence, in this context, he says, eating food offered to idols, he calls them so-called gods in verse 4, eating foods offered to idols makes no difference. Food, he says, will not bring us close to God. We are no worse off if we do not eat and no better off if we do. And you'll see this in chapter 8, verse 8. Yet, in chapter 8, he is emphatic that most Christians may not have the ability to grasp this understanding. Remember, Paul is speaking to the Corinthians, many of whom who were recent converts from paganism. Hence, so as to not cause scandal and cause other Christians to stumble and think it is okay to eat foods offered to idols, Paul in chapter 8 says it is best not to eat such food, and he ended it with that. It is best not to eat such food. Now, today's text will take this explanation of chapter 8 one step ahead, and I want you to pay careful attention to what I'm going to teach. Now, Paul begins in chapter 10 verse 13 to explain that all of us are tested, and therefore you need to read the whole of chapter 10 and not just the verses of today. So he starts by saying all of us have been tested. Now, we may think our testing is very unique and very special, but temptation, says Paul, is a common human experience. Yet each one of us is tested according to our spiritual growth, and God won't let you be tested. These are the words of Scripture. God won't let you be tested beyond your ability of endurance. If so, Satan would destroy us the minute God would allow us to be tested beyond our capability of endurance. Now, to help us deal with these earthly temptations, God provides a way of escape when faced with such temptations. He provides the way. Listen to this. He provides the way. He does not force us to use that way. Therefore, we have the choice to say no to sin and take the way of escape that God gives us. To be tempted is not sin, but to surrender to temptation is definitely sin. Now, in this context, because you must always place a text within its context, in this context, Paul once again goes back to what he began to teach us in chapter 8 and begins with the words of today's text in verse 14, therefore. Therefore means it's a culmination of what he has just said. So, Paul is now talking of how God, Yahweh, provides a way for us to resist the temptation to cause scandal to others by eating meat offered to idols. Clearly, Paul does not prohibit the consumption of meat that is sold in the market that may even be offered to idols, or eat food from the market that may have had a prayer of thanksgiving said before the food was cooked or sold. Look at chapter 10 verse 25. He says that very clearly. I'm sorry, it's not verse 25, it's in chapter 10. Yes, it is chapter 10 verse 25. Sorry, I'm struggling with my eyesight. Let me read that a bit to you. Eat whatever is sold in the meat market without raising any questions on the ground of conscience. So clearly he says you can eat meat that is sold in the market even if it was offered, he's talking to the Corinthians, even if it was offered to a pagan god. You may have not known about it, or perhaps a blessing was said to their god, and now that meat or whatever the item is sold, he says you may eat that. Now, neither is a Christian prohibited from eating food in the home of an unbeliever, a person of another faith. So you go to your fellow Hindu's home or a Muslim's home, Paul does not say you cannot eat the food that is offered in their house. In fact, Paul says in chapter 10 verse 27, which is a little after our text, he says, if you are disposed, therefore, I like that word, he says, you must be disposed, you must be comfortable. If you are comfortable to go to such a home, eat what is set before you without raising any questions on the grounds of conscience. And look at that, you'll find it in verse 27. If an unbeliever invites you to a meal and you are disposed to go, you are comfortable to go. Yeah, it doesn't mean you're available to go, you're comfortable. You may not be comfortable, but if you're comfortable to go, eat whatever is set before you without raising any question on the ground of conscience. But, and here's the big but, if you go to a non-believer's house and you are told or you are made aware that what is set before you or given to you is offered in sacrifice to their idols, then you are not to eat it. In short, if you participate in a religious ceremony and are offered the same food offered to that idol at that ceremony, you are not to eat that food. Where do I get that from? You'll see it in verse 28. But if someone says to you, this has been offered in sacrifice, then do not eat it. But if you simply go to the home of a non-believer, to a Hindu or a Muslim or whoever else, you may eat what is set before you. So clearly he explains, if you are participating in their religious sacrifice, or you are made aware that that food was offered and you are present there, then don't eat it. Note, there are in that sense two elements here that are mandatory. First, I take part in the religious ceremony and I'm offered the same sacrificial food offered in that ceremony, then I must not consume it. So those are the two elements you need to watch out for. Now, let us now come to the text of today, which will throw up another set of challenges and nuances. Paul in chapter 10, verse 14, when he begins with those words, therefore, my dear friends, asks the Corinthians of Corinth, and he asks us. He says, flee from the worship of idols. That's what he says. My dear friends, flee from the worship of idols. Now remember, he says, we may be tested, but God gives us a way out. And that choice to take that way out or not determines if we commit sin or not. Paul is thus saying, do not put yourself in a sin situation where you may have to participate in the worship of idols. Assume that you are invited to an office puja. Just assume it. You are invited to your office puja. Maybe you are invited to a friend's place where the host clearly intends to have a religious ceremony in which an idol is worshipped. It is your duty as a Christian to decline politely and respectfully, lest you end up finding yourself asked also to worship the idol. And in order then not to offend your host or to offend your business partner or to offend your superior at work, you bring sin upon yourself by participating in this. So Paul says that there may be some who think to themselves, and not only Paul says, I can see this in these days too, there are many Catholics and Christians who say, what's wrong in participating in a puja? After all, they will say, I don't believe in what I'm doing, so it's okay. I have a modern worldview. I'm not narrow-minded. This is the kind of talk that we hear. Please, this is not a question of your mind or your worldview. We are not here to contest your mind or to contest your worldview. Pardon me for being so strong, but very often we have this thrown at us. We are not here to question your mind or your worldview, but a clear religious teaching is being presented, and we would like to present that, and that is our right as believers, as Christians. And I want to say that very clearly, with no offense to anybody, including Christians who hold such kind of views like all gods are one. There are many Christians who say this. This is a fallacious teaching. It's a wrong teaching. Yeah. But when you say that this is a wrong teaching, they will start saying, oh, Father, you are narrow-minded. Well, good luck to you if you think I'm narrow-minded. I would like to be faithful to what the church says. Now, remember the principle that Paul gave us. By your actions, he says, you cause scandal to the community and you lead others to sin. So, you may say, I'm broad-minded, I'm not narrow-minded, whatever. Your actions bring scandal to the community. And in this regard, I'm sorry to say that when priests do this, there was a viral video some years ago, I think it was in Spain, a statue of a god was brought into a Hindu god was brought into a church. Many people hailed it as, interreligious dialogue. I'm sorry, it's not interreligious dialogue. I think you know nothing about interreligious dialogue. They spoke of it as openness. It was pure blasphemy and the breaking of commandments. And the same goes for any other case where we, in the name of getting of religious harmony, do such things. There are many other ways to bring about religious harmony. Yeah, it doesn't have to include religion. And I tell my Hindu and Muslim friends quite clearly, this is my faith. We have one God, and we are not allowed to bow down before any other gods. But before we go on to the next point, let us also place this text in context, lest we also lose the plot. You see, Paul is speaking to the Christians about what goes on in the pagan temples in Corinth. Can I say that again? He's talking about what goes on in the pagan temples in Corinth. So that's the context. What's going on in the pagan temples in Corinth? Now, please do not apply this teaching with a brush to all religions, as each religion may understand idol worship rather differently. Having said that, I am now reiterating what Paul said. No idol worship. Okay, I'm clear about this. No idol worship. But Paul is talking about the Corinthians and about pagan sacrifices in Corinth. Now, Paul is stating that what goes on in pagan temples, I'm stressing that again, what goes on in pagan temples may not be as innocent as it may seem, as may be the case also perhaps in other religious beliefs too. Paul asks them to consider this, and that's our text of today, which is a little alarming. He says, just as participating in the one bread and the one cup at the Lord's table signifies a unity of understanding of what and who is being received and what and who we become as a consequence of what we receive, in the same way, when one eats from the table the food offered to an idol, Paul says, do you not become one in the faith of that belief system, and do you not become one with that God? Now, just as the Christian practice of communion speaks of unity and fellowship with Jesus, so these pagan banquets in Corinth, given in the honor of idols, spoke of unity with demons who took advantage of misdirected worship. To eat at a pagan temple banquet was actually to have fellowship at the altar of those idols. So eating the food offered to idols is not, says Paul, as innocent as it may seem, because for the pagans, they also offered that food to demons. Now, Paul is not saying that the idols of the Corinthians were demons. He's not saying that. He's saying that demonic spirits take advantage of idol worship to deceive and enslave people. Without knowing it, idol worshippers are glorifying demons in their sacrifice. He's stating that demons take advantage of man's ignorant and self-serving worship. If you must eat and drink the body of Christ, which alone has the power to nourish you. Now, there may be some who will still say that as long as we participate in the Lord's table, as long as I go to Sunday Mass, oh, I am safe. We are safe with Jesus. Paul answers that they disgrace the Lord's table when they fellowship with idols and then come and fellowship at the Lord's table. Paul is clear. Only He, the true God, has the right to be worshipped and is offended when we worship other gods. And lest we forget, my dear friends, may I remind you of that great commandment which we learnt in Catechism. I am the great I am. I am the Lord your God. You will have no other gods before me. Now, finally, on a pastoral note, so as not to leave some confused, because teachings like this have a way where people catch the bull by its tail or pick up exclusively what they think they've heard. Please, if you are in confusion, listen to this video several times. I'm clear about it. But pastorally, let me help you out to summarize all of this. First, avoid vigorously any situation wherein you might find yourself being asked to worship an idol, especially if your non-participation may hurt your host. Number 2, idol worship is a big no-no for Christians. Number 3, if you know that some food is blessed on the occasion of a religious ceremony and then given to you, and you have not participated in the religious ceremony, you may, the word is you may consume that food, but it is best avoided and it could be politely declined or maybe respectfully given to someone else of the same faith as the person who has offered you that food. You don't need to throw it out into a bin. That would be disrespectful. And number 4, you cannot participate in a religious ceremony where any other god is worshipped. If you are simply present because of a matter of compulsion or coincidence, and you have, in inverted commas, participated either consciously or unconsciously in that religious rite, then you must not consume that food offered to you. If you do, as St. Paul says, you cannot partake of the table of the Lord before you make your confession. I hope this teaching has been abundantly clear. This, along with my previous teaching of chapter 8 and 9 of 1 Corinthians. So 8, 9 and 10 teach us very clearly about idol worship, and it teaches us what do we do with food offered to idols. I hope you've enjoyed this teaching. I hope it's been clear for most of you. Share it with your friends, because a lot of Catholics need to understand this teaching. And I put it out. I know I've been promising to do this for a while. I waited for this text to come in the liturgy, and I'm using this. So it's not that it coincides with any religious festival. This is a teaching that coincides with the readings within the Eucharist. So do like this video. Please leave your comments, leave your thoughts. I'd love to hear from you. And I want to say thank you to all our donors of the Love, Joy, Hope Foundation. If you would like to make some donation in terms of a breakfast, lunch or dinner to our children of our home, you may please send me a WhatsApp message on 98202 42151. This home is run by a Catholic couple, Lenny and Nadia Suarez. They have 2 children of their own, and they have now taken several more. This children has the sanction of the Child and Women's Commission. So do support this. It also has a tax exemption, so you do get an ATG certification. You can always contact me on my number, and I will put you in touch with them. Bye everybody. Don't forget, as I said, to like this video, share it. Today is a Saturday. It will be a great Saturday listening. Bye-bye.